My in-laws placed my parents at a wobbly table next to the swinging kitchen doors at my own wedding reception. When I demanded to know why they were moved from the VIP section, my mother-in-law looked me up and down and said we did not want their cheap clothes embarrassing our important guests. My fiancé just shrugged and told me to lower my voice because his investors were watching. So I walked straight to the DJ booth, took the microphone, and made an announcement that shattered their entire world. The next day, they lost everything because they had no idea who I really was. My name is Naomi. I am 33 years old, and until that night, I thought I was marrying the love of my life. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to burn a bridge to protect the people you love. I stepped out of the bridal suite and into the grand ballroom. The room was dripping in luxury. Towering arrangements of white orchids sat on every table and crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the 300 guests, chattering softly over string music. It was supposed to be the happiest moment of my life. I adjusted the heavy silk of my custom gown and looked toward the front of the room where the VIP tables were arranged. I was looking for the two people who mattered most to me. My parents, Thomas and Martha. They were not there. I blinked, thinking the lighting was playing tricks on me. I scanned the faces at the tables closest to the sweetheart table. I saw my wealthy new mother-in-law, Beatrice, laughing with some women draped in diamonds. I saw my fiancé, Preston, shaking hands with a man I vaguely recognized as a real estate developer. But my parents were nowhere to be found. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I gathered my heavy skirt and began walking through the maze of round tables. My heart hammered against my ribs. I checked the secondary family tables, nothing. Then I heard the harsh crash of a tray hitting the floor, followed by a sharp gasp. The sound came from the absolute back of the room right next to the heavy wooden doors leading into the catering kitchen. I pushed past a group of oblivious guests and froze. There, shoved into a dark corner next to a busing station, was a small, cramped table. It was barely big enough for two people. Sitting there, looking completely humiliated, were my parents. My father, Thomas, a retired union worker, was frantically wiping at his lap with a thin paper napkin. A frantic waiter was apologizing profusely, having just spilled a pitcher of ice water all over my father. The water was soaking into the dark fabric of his only suit. It was an off-the-rack suit, but he had spent an hour ironing it that morning just to look presentable for my big day. Beside him, my mother Martha looked close to tears. Her hands trembled as she tried to help him dry off. These were the people who had drained their modest retirement savings just to buy my wedding dress because they wanted me to feel like a princess. And here they were treated like a dirty secret meant to be hidden away from the wealthy elite. The sheer disrespect made my blood run cold. My vision blurred with immediate hot rage. I did not care about the elegant music or the expensive champagne flowing around me. I marched over to the wedding planner who was hovering nervously near the kitchen entrance. Her name badge read Clara, and she looked terrified the moment she saw my face. "Clara, what is this?" I demanded, my voice trembling with suppressed fury. "Why are my parents sitting back here by the kitchen doors?" They were assigned to table 1. Clara swallowed hard, backing up slightly. She clutched her clipboard to her chest like a shield. "Naomi, I am so sorry," she stammered, darting a look around the room. "I did not make this change. I swear to you I set up the tables exactly as you requested." "Then who moved them?" I asked. I stepped closer, not letting her break eye contact. Clara hesitated, then raised a shaking finger. She pointed directly at the VIP section, where my mother-in-law Beatrice was holding court, a smug smile plastered across her perfectly made-up face. "She said they did not fit the aesthetic of the front tables," Clara whispered. "She forced me to move their place cards right before the heavy doors opened and let the guests in." I let go of Clara without another word. My blood was roaring in my ears, but my steps were perfectly steady as I crossed the ballroom. I walked straight toward table 1. The VIP table, the table where my parents were supposed to be sitting right now, enjoying the prime rib dinner they had been so excited to try. Instead, Beatrice was sitting in the center chair holding a crystal champagne flute and laughing loudly with her friends. Preston was standing right beside her, beaming, as he shook hands with another wealthy couple. I stepped right into the middle of their circle. The laughter died instantly. Beatrice looked up at me, her smile freezing into a thin, hard line. She did not look like a mother welcoming her new daughter. She looked like a landlord who had just spotted a pest. Beatrice. I said, my voice low but caring enough for the people immediately around us to hear. Why are my parents sitting at a wobbly table next to the kitchen garbage cans? A few guests nearby stopped talking and turned their heads. Beatrice sighed deeply and dramatically rolling her eyes as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum over a toy. She set her champagne flute down on the pristine white tablecloth. "Oh, Naomi, please," she said, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "Do not be so dramatic on your wedding night. It is unbecoming." "I am not being dramatic," I replied, taking a step closer. "I asked you a direct question. I paid for this venue, I assigned those seats. You threatened the wedding planner and forced her to move my mother and father. Why?" Preston finally noticed the tension. He excused himself from the couple he was talking to and hurried over, grabbing my arm. His grip was tight. Too tight. "Naomi, babe, what are you doing?" he hissed, leaning in close so only I could hear. "You are causing a scene. Smile. The investors are right over there and I am pitching them a massive commercial real estate deal next week." I pulled my arm out of his grasp. "I do not care about the investors, Preston. Your mother moved my parents to the kitchen doors. A waiter just spilled water all over my dad. I want them moved back right now." Beatrice stood up, smoothing the front of her designer silk dress. She looked me up and down with absolute disgust. She did not bother lowering her voice this time. "I moved them because they do not belong at table 1, Naomi," she announced loud enough for half the room to hear. "Look at your father in his cheap suit. Look at your mother gawking at the centerpieces like she has never seen a flower before. We did not want them embarrassing the important guests of this family. Sitting there will not kill them. They should be grateful they even got an invitation to a room like this." The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air. The silence around table 1 was deafening. I looked at Beatrice, staring into her cold, entitled eyes. Then I looked at Preston, expecting the man I was about to spend the rest of my life with to defend me. I expected him to tell his mother she had crossed a line. I expected him to demand respect for the people who raised me. Instead, Preston let out a heavy, exasperated sigh. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair and looked at me with pure annoyance. "Naomi, just let it go," he whispered, leaning in again. "My mom has a point, okay? Your parents are a little rough around the edges. They do not know how to network with these kinds of people. You are embarrassing me right now. Just go sit down and pretend everything is fine. Do not ruin this night for my family, not our family, his family." In that single moment, the illusion shattered completely. For 3 years, I had played the part of the quiet, unassuming girlfriend. I had let Preston believe he was the big, successful businessman, while I just worked a boring desk job at a small finance company. I had hidden my true wealth, my status, and my power because I wanted someone to love me for me, not for my portfolio. I thought Preston was that man. I thought he was just a little overly ambitious, but fundamentally good. I was wrong. He was nothing but a shallow, social-climbing coward. And his mother was a monster. They looked at my parents, working-class heroes who had sacrificed everything to give me a good life, and saw nothing but trash. They thought I was weak. They thought I would just swallow my pride and cry in the bathroom because I was so desperate to be part of their elite world. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I took a deep breath. The anger inside me solidified into something cold, hard, and incredibly sharp. I looked at Preston and gave him a chillingly calm smile. "You are right, Preston," I said softly. "I really should not ruin this night for your family." Preston relaxed visibly, a smug smile returning to his face. "That is my girl," he said, trying to put his arm around my waist. See, I knew you would be reasonable. Now go touch up your makeup. I stepped back out of his reach. I turned on my heel and walked away. But I did not walk toward the bathrooms. I did not walk toward my parents either. I walked straight across the dance floor, my eyes locked on the DJ booth. It was time to end this. Before I could make it halfway across the polished hardwood floor, Beatrice called after me. Her shrill voice sliced right through the silence that had settled over our section of the room. "Where do you think you are going, you ungrateful little girl?" she yelled. I stopped in my tracks. The low murmur of conversation across the entire ballroom died out completely. The string quartet, realizing something was wrong, slowly stopped playing one by one until there was absolute quiet. Hundreds of eyes shifted toward us. I slowly turned around to face her. Beatrice had stepped out from behind the VIP table, her face flushed with indignation, and her hands planted firmly on her hips. Preston was right behind her, looking panicked, but doing absolutely nothing to stop his mother from escalating the situation. "You are throwing a temper tantrum over a simple seating arrangement," Beatrice continued, stepping toward me so the whole crowd could hear her. "Do you have any idea how much this family has sacrificed for you? You entered this relationship penniless and completely ordinary. We welcomed you into our elite circle. We spent $200,000 on this reception alone just to give you a taste of a life you could never possibly afford on your own. And this is how you repay our generosity, by causing a massive public scene in front of our most vital business associates." The sheer arrogance in her tone was staggering. She truly believed her own lies. She actually thought I was some desperate charity case pulling myself out of poverty through her son. I looked at the wealthy investors and socialites sitting nearby. They were watching me with pity and disdain, believing every single word Beatrice said. I caught the eye of Keisha, my future sister-in-law, sitting quietly at table 3. She was the only one who did not look at me with contempt. Keisha gave me a subtle nod. She knew exactly how toxic these people were. I let out a soft laugh. It was not a happy sound. It was cold and sharp, and it echoed off the high ceiling. I closed the distance between us until I was standing just a few feet away from my soon-to-be mother-in-law. "You spent $200,000 on this reception?" I asked, my voice ringing out clearly across the silent room. "Is that what Preston told you, Beatrice? Is that the heroic story he has been selling to his friends and business partners all night long?" Preston lunged forward. "Naomi, stop talking right now," he demanded, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. He reached out and grabbed my arm again, his fingers digging into my skin with real force this time. "You are just upset. You are embarrassing yourself. Come with me right now before you ruin everything we have worked for." I looked down at his hand gripping my bare arm and then looked up into his desperate, terrified eyes. "I am completely calm, Preston," I said softly. "Let go of me." When he hesitated, I yanked my arm free with a sudden violent jerk that made him stumble forward. I took a step back, making sure everyone in the front rows could hear exactly what I had to say next. "Let us clear up this little financial fairy tale right now," I announced, turning so the investors could hear me too. "You did not pay for this reception, Beatrice. Your son did not pay for it either. In fact, 3 months ago, when the final deposits were due, Preston came to my apartment begging for help. He told me his credit cards were completely maxed out. He said his real estate company was facing a massive cash flow problem and his accounts were frozen. He literally got down on his knees crying and begged me to co-sign the venue contract using my pristine credit score." The color instantly drained from Beatrice's face. Her mouth fell open. She snapped her head toward Preston, who was now looking at the floor, unable to meet his mother's eyes or the glaring eyes of his wealthy investors. "That is right," I continued, my voice rising with absolute certainty. "Every single chandelier, every single white orchid, every drop of champagne in this room was secured by my name and my financial credibility. You did not give me a taste of luxury, Beatrice. I financed your party so you could show off to people who do not even care about you." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. The investors Preston had been trying to impress were now whispering amongst themselves, casting highly suspicious glances his way. A man who could not even afford his own wedding reception was clearly not a man they wanted to trust with a massive commercial real estate deal. The illusion of his wealth was crumbling in real time. Preston looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. "Naomi, please!" He choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "You are destroying my reputation. We can talk about this in private. I will fix the tables. I will apologize to your dad. Just please stop talking." It was far too late for apologies. He had shown me his true character. He was willing to let my parents be treated like garbage just to maintain a fake image. I was not going to spend the rest of my life tethered to a family built on lies, debt, and fake wealth. Instead of crying or screaming like they expected me to, I simply smiled. It was a cold, detached smile that made Preston take a physical step back from me in fear. "There is nothing left to talk about, Preston," I said. I turned my back on him. I did not look at Beatrice as she gasped for air. I did not look at the gossiping guests. I resumed my walk across the dance floor. My heels clicked rhythmically against the wood. My destination was clear. The DJ booth was elevated on a small stage at the far end of the room. The DJ, a young guy in a sharp suit, was staring at me with wide eyes, completely unsure of what to do. He had paused the music entirely. The microphone was resting right there on his turntable. The first hook was set. The trap they built for themselves had just snapped shut, and I was about to drop the hammer. I stepped up onto the small stage. The DJ backed away slowly, raising his hands, wanting no part in what was about to happen. I picked up the microphone, tapping it once. The sharp thud echoed through the massive speakers, amplifying the tension suffocating the grand ballroom. 300 pairs of eyes locked onto me. I saw Preston frantically pushing his way through the crowd. Beatrice clutched her chest as if she were about to faint. I looked all the way to the back by the kitchen doors where my parents stood. My dad had his arm around my mom. I gave them a tiny, reassuring smile. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice booming across the room. "Thank you all for coming out tonight to celebrate what was supposed to be the union of two families. However, as you have just witnessed, there is no union here. There is only a financial transaction wrapped in a tuxedo. Therefore, I am officially announcing that this wedding is cancelled." A collective gasp ripped through the room. Whispers spread like wildfire. I saw the real estate investors Preston had been trying to impress putting down their napkins and reaching for their phones. Preston was halfway across the dance floor, now yelling my name, but his voice was drowned out by the amplified sound of my own. "I am not finished," I announced, cutting through the noise. I walked to the edge of the stage. A waiter stood frozen right below me, holding a silver tray with a single glass of red wine. I reached down and picked up the crystal glass. The deep crimson liquid sloshed gently against the sides. I looked right at Preston, who had finally reached the bottom of the stage steps. His face was pale with panic. "You told your mother I came into this family with nothing." "Preston," I said. "You let her treat my hard-working parents like peasants because they do not wear designer labels. You cared more about a fake image than the woman you were supposed to protect. So let me rid myself of everything you think your family gave me." I raised the glass of red wine, and without a single second of hesitation, I tipped it forward. The dark red liquid cascaded down, ruining the front of my custom white silk gown. It soaked deep into the fabric, looking like a massive bleeding wound. The crowd shrieked. Women covered their mouths in shock. Preston recoiled as if I had thrown the wine in his face instead. The dress was ruined, and with it the final symbol of our fake relationship was destroyed. "Now for the logistics," I continued, my voice deadly calm. "As I mentioned earlier, the deposit for this venue was paid using my name and my credit. That means this space belongs to me for the rest of the night. Since I hold the contract, I am making an executive decision. Beatrice Preston, and anyone from your side of the family is no longer welcome. I want you out of this building in exactly 10 minutes. Preston gripped the edge of the stage. You cannot do this, Naomi, he pleaded, his voice cracking. You are being crazy. We have guests. We have a massive bill to settle. Oh, I am very aware of the bill, I replied, leaning down. I paid the deposit to secure the room, but the remaining $200,000 for the catering, the orchids, the champagne, and the string quartet is all under your name, Preston. You wanted the luxury wedding to impress your business associates. Now you get to pay for it. Good luck explaining to your investors why you are begging the catering staff for a payment plan. Absolute chaos erupted. Beatrice let out a piercing scream from the VIP table demanding someone call security. But the security guards at the doors did not move toward me. I had hired them. Their instructions were strictly to protect the contract holder. The wealthy investors Preston had been catering to all night were already standing up, throwing their jackets over their arms and heading straight for the exit. They wanted nothing to do with a man who was publicly exposed as a fraud. I glanced over at table 3. Keisha was sitting next to Preston's brother Donovan. While Donovan looked completely horrified, Keisha casually picked up her champagne flute and took a slow, deliberate sip. She gave me a small, victorious smile. She knew this empire of lies was crumbling, and she was absolutely here for the show. The room was spinning into total madness, but standing there in my ruined dress, I had never felt more powerful. Preston scrambled up the steps of the stage, his face twisted in a mask of pure desperation and rage. "Give me that microphone," he yelled, lunging toward me. But before his hands could even graze the fabric of my ruined dress, 2 massive security guards materialized, seemingly out of nowhere. They stepped smoothly between us, forming an impenetrable wall of black suits and crossed arms. I had hired them through a private security firm using my own corporate account, and their instructions were ironclad. They answered only to me. "Sir, you need to step back," one of the guards commanded, his voice deep and echoing with authority. Preston slammed his hands against the guard chest, trying to push his way through. But it was like hitting a brick wall. He stumbled backward, almost tripping over a mess of microphone cables. From across the room, Beatrice finally found her voice. It was a shrill, piercing scream that cut through the murmurs of the fleeing guests. "Arrest her!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. "She is destroying our property. She is ruining our family name. Call the police right now." The banquet manager, who had been watching the entire spectacle unfold, simply shook his head and crossed his arms. He knew exactly whose name was on the master contract. Nobody was calling the police on the woman who held the purse strings. I handed the microphone back to the terrified DJ, who took it with shaking hands. I carefully descended the stage steps, the heavy wine-soaked silk of my dress dragging heavily behind me. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. The investors, the socialites, the fake friends Preston had meticulously curated, they all scrambled out of my way, casting nervous glances at the stain on my gown. I walked straight toward the back of the room, where my parents were still standing by the kitchen doors. My father had stopped trying to dry his suit. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, looking at me with an expression of absolute awe. My mother had her hands clasped over her mouth, tears brimming in her eyes, but they were not tears of humiliation anymore. They were tears of pride. "Let us go home," I said softly, reaching out and taking each of their hands. "You do not have to spend another second in this place." As we turned to walk toward the grand double doors leading out to the lobby, I felt eyes on me. I glanced to my left and saw Keisha. She was standing by table 3, adjusting the strap of her elegant evening bag. Keisha was 31 years old, a brilliant African-American corporate lawyer who had married Preston's older brother Donovan 5 years ago. I knew from quiet conversations in corners at family dinners that Beatrice treated Keisha with the same barely concealed disdain she reserved for anyone who did not fit her narrow, outdated view of high society. Beatrice constantly made passive-aggressive comments about Keisha, demanding career and her background. Tonight, Keisha looked absolutely radiant. As I walked past her, our eyes met. She did not say a word. She did not have to. She just gave me a slow, deliberate nod. It was a nod of profound respect, a silent acknowledgement between two women who knew exactly how toxic this family was. She knew I had just done what she had likely dreamed of doing 100 times. I nodded back and kept walking. We stepped out of the suffocating heat of the ballroom and into the cool, crisp night air. The valet brought my father practical sedan around immediately. As we drove away from the opulent venue, leaving the chaos and the shattered illusions behind, a massive weight lifted off my chest. I looked down at the ruined white silk and let out a long breath. By the time I reached my hotel room, the adrenaline was beginning to wear off, replaced by a sharp, focused clarity. I tossed my clutch onto the bed, and that is when my phone started vibrating violently against the wood of the nightstand. The screen lit up with Preston's name. He had been calling non-stop. I ignored the calls and opened the text messages. They were a frantic, escalating mix of rage and panic. "You are dead to me," he wrote in the first text. "You humiliated my mother. You ruined my business deals." A minute later, another message came through. "You think you are so smart, Naomi. You think you can just walk away and leave me with this bill. You forgot one thing." Then came the final text, the one that set the stage for his next disastrous move. "I am heading to the penthouse right now with my mother. You better have all your garbage packed by tomorrow morning. I am the one on the lease, and I am throwing you out on the street. You are going to regret this for the rest of your life." I stared at the glowing screen, reading his threat over and over again. He thought he had a trump card. He thought he could render me homeless by morning. I tossed the phone back onto the nightstand and laughed out loud in the empty room. He was walking right into a trap he did not even know existed. The sun was barely up when I checked out of the cheap hotel and drove back to the penthouse I shared with Preston. It occupied the top floor of a sleek high-rise offering panoramic views of the downtown skyline. The morning light poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the expensive, modern furniture Preston always loved to brag about. I walked into the master bedroom and calmly pulled my leather duffel bag from the closet. I started folding a few clothes, placing them inside. I was not packing because I was running away. I was simply packing an overnight bag because I knew the next 24 hours were going to be a legal war zone. I wanted to be prepared. I walked into the kitchen, poured a fresh cup of dark roast coffee, and stood by the massive marble island waiting. Right at 8 o'clock sharp, I heard heavy metallic clanking coming from the front foyer. Someone was loudly tampering with the deadbolt. A moment later, the intricate lock mechanism clicked open. The solid mahogany door swung wide and hit the interior wall with an aggressive thud. Preston marched into the apartment looking like a man who had just conquered a small country. He wore a sharp, tailored navy suit, trying to project absolute authority. Right behind him was Beatrice, her face set in a triumphant sneer. She clutched her designer handbag like a weapon. Trailing awkwardly behind them was a young guy holding a heavy toolbox. He was clearly a local locksmith, looking incredibly uncomfortable to be caught in the middle of domestic warfare. Preston stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me standing in the kitchen taking a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. He had fully expected me to be asleep, crying, or frantically trying to figure out where to go. Instead, I was fully dressed, perfectly calm, and watching him like he was a slightly annoying insect. "What are you still doing here?" Preston demanded, his voice echoing loudly off the high ceilings. "I told you clearly last night I wanted you out of my place." I set my coffee mug down on the smooth marble counter. "Good morning to you too, Preston. I am just enjoying my morning brew. Did you actually bring a locksmith to your own apartment?" Beatrice stepped out from behind her son, puffing out her chest. "It is not your apartment anymore, Naomi," she snapped, stepping into the living room and looking around with absolute disdain. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "My son signed the lease for this penthouse. You are just a freeloader who managed to ride his coattails for 3 long years. Get your trash out of this property right now before I call the cops and have you escorted out in handcuffs." The locksmith shifted his weight nervously, rattling the heavy steel tools in his metal box. "Listen, man," he said, turning to Preston. "I just drill the locks and change the cylinders. If there is an active legal dispute over the property, I really should not be involved in this. There is absolutely nothing to sort out." Preston snapped, barking at the locksmith. "I am the sole name on the residential lease agreement. She has absolutely no legal right to be standing here. Change the locks right now. I am paying you double your emergency rate for a reason." The locksmith hesitated, but eventually sighed and turned toward the door to start his work. Preston turned back to me, a smug, arrogant smirk spreading across his handsome face. He crossed his arms over his chest, leaning back on his heels with a look of total victory. "You really thought you could embarrass us in front of my high-net-worth commercial real estate investors and just walk away without any consequences?" he sneered. "Well, welcome to the harsh reality of the real world, Naomi. I am terminating your access to my successful life. I am keeping the luxury furniture, the expensive electronics, and everything else because you owe me for the severe emotional distress you caused my mother last night. You have exactly 5 minutes to grab your little bag and leave my home forever." I listened to his entire speech without interrupting. I watched them puff up with completely unearned pride, truly believing they had successfully rendered me homeless with a single phone call. I picked up my coffee, taking another slow sip. The moment tasted incredibly sweet. I reached into my blazer pocket, pulling out a crisp manila envelope. "You're home?" I asked softly, raising an eyebrow. "Are you absolutely sure about that fact, Preston? Because you might want to read this legal document very carefully first, before proceeding with this forced eviction." I slid the manila envelope across the smooth marble surface of the kitchen island. Preston stared at it for a second before letting out a condescending scoff. He snatched it up, tearing the flap open with exaggerated force. He pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers. Beatrice leaned in close, peering over his shoulder. Her eyes narrowed, trying to make sense of the dense legal jargon. "What is this garbage?" Preston demanded, flipping to the second page. "This is just a copy of my residential lease agreement. I already told you I am the sole tenant listed on this document. You are not on it. That means you have zero rights to this property." "Look at the top of the first page," Preston I instructed, leaning forward slightly. "Look at the name of the property owner you signed that lease with." Preston rolled his eyes, but flipped back to the front page. "It says Apex Horizon Holdings, LLC. He read aloud, his tone dripping with impatience. "It is a corporate property management firm. I write my rent checks to them every single month. What exactly is your point, Naomi? Do you think you can call the management company and cry to them to let you stay?" I did not answer right away. I let the silence stretch, letting his arrogant words hang in the air. Then I pulled a second, much thinner document from my blazer pocket and laid it flat on the counter. "Apex Horizon Holdings, LLC is a private asset management company." I said, my voice steady and clear, "and I am the founder, sole proprietor, and 100% equity owner of that company. I bought this penthouse 2 years ago as a private real estate investment." Preston froze. His eyes darted from my face down to the paper on the counter. It was the official state registration for the LLC, clearly listing my name as the sole managing member. The color began to drain from his face rapidly. "When we decided to move in together, you insisted on living in a luxury downtown high-rise," I continued, crossing my arms. "But your credit was already secretly tanking, and your income-to-debt ratio was a disaster. No reputable luxury building in this city was going to approve your application. So I quietly had my own company approve you as a tenant. You have not been writing rent checks to a faceless corporation, Preston. You have been writing them to me. I am not your roommate. I am your landlord." Beatrice let out a harsh, breathless laugh. "That is a lie," she snapped, pointing a shaking finger at the documents. "This is a pathetic forgery." My son is a successful real estate developer. He does not rent from some low-level finance clerk. He is not a successful developer, Beatrice I corrected sharply. He is a fraud drowning in debt. And speaking of debt, Preston, you really should check your mailbox more often. Or maybe you just threw the notices away, hoping they would magically disappear like your other financial obligations. What notices? Preston whispered. His voice had lost all of its booming authority. He sounded small. He sounded terrified. The official notices of default, I replied. You have not paid your rent in 3 months. You owe Apex Horizon Holdings $24,000 in back rent and late fees. According to the terms of the lease you signed, you forfeited your right to occupy this property 30 days ago. You cannot do this, Preston stammered, dropping the lease agreement onto the floor. The papers scattered across the hardwood. You cannot just kick me out on the street. There are tenant protection laws, Naomi. You have to give me formal notice. You have to take me to court. I already did, I said, tapping my fingernail against the marble countertop. I filed the eviction papers weeks ago when I first realized you were secretly shifting money around to hide your debts. The court granted the eviction order last Friday. I was originally going to give you until the end of the month to figure out your living situation. But after watching you and your mother humiliate my parents last night, I decided to expedite the process. Right on cue, a heavy rhythmic knocking echoed through the penthouse. It was not the impatient tampering of a locksmith. It was the firm, authoritative knock of law enforcement. The locksmith, who had been standing silently by the door this entire time, backed away quickly. He reached over and turned the handle, pulling the door open. 2 uniformed county sheriffs stood in the hallway. One of them held a clipboard with a bright yellow legal notice attached to the front. Are you Preston? I asked, gesturing toward the door. Because I believe your ride is here. Beatrice gasped, clutching her chest as if she had just been shot. The sheriff stepped into the foyer, looking directly at Preston. We are here to execute a court-ordered eviction notice, the taller sheriff announced. You have exactly 15 minutes to gather your essential personal belongings and vacate these premises. If you refuse to comply, you will be removed by force and charged with criminal trespassing. Preston looked completely paralyzed. He stared at the sheriffs, then looked back at me, his mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. The smug, arrogant man who had marched into my home intending to leave me homeless was entirely gone. In his place was a defeated, broke, and newly evicted tenant. I picked up my coffee, taking one last sip. 5 minutes, Preston, I reminded him, echoing his own exact words from earlier. Grab your little bag and leave my home forever. Preston stood frozen for another long second before the taller sheriff placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. That broke the spell. Preston stumbled backward into the master bedroom, his breathing shallow and rapid. I stood in the kitchen and watched him frantically rip his designer suits off the hangers, stuffing them into a leather duffel bag without even folding them. He was tossing expensive shoes and silk ties into a chaotic pile, completely abandoning the careful, curated aesthetic he usually obsessed over. Beatrice was not faring any better. She was scurrying around the living room trying to grab crystal vases and expensive coffee table books. One of the sheriffs stepped directly into her path, holding up a hand. Put those down, ma'am, the sheriff ordered, his voice stern. The eviction order requires the tenant to take only essential personal belongings. Anything else must remain on the premises until ownership is legally determined. Beatrice gasped, her face turning an ugly shade of purple. These items belong to my family, she shrieked, clutching a silver picture frame to her chest. Put it down or you will be placed in handcuffs, the sheriff repeated, taking a step closer. Beatrice slammed the frame down on the glass table with a loud crack and stomped toward the front door, her designer heels clicking angrily against the hardwood floor. Preston emerged from the bedroom hauling 2 overstuffed duffel bags. He looked disheveled and frantic, sweat beading on his forehead. The sheriffs gestured for him to move toward the exit. He walked past the kitchen island, but just as he reached the foyer, he stopped. A sudden dark realization washed over his face. The panic in his eyes was instantly replaced by a sharp, vicious gleam. He dropped one of the heavy bags onto the floor and reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out his phone. "You think you have won, Naomi," he said, his voice dropping to a nasty, theatrical whisper. "You think just because you own this drywall and these windows you hold all the power. You forgot about our shared assets. I did not move, I did not blink, I just watched him tap the screen of his phone. When we moved in together, you insisted on opening a joint checking account." He continued, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "You said it was for shared expenses. You deposited your entire life savings into that account. $50,000. You told me it took you 5 years of saving every penny from your little desk job to build that safety net." He held the phone up so the screen was facing me. He had the banking app open. "And since my name is on the account, I have full legal authorization to move those funds anywhere I want." Preston sneered. His thumb hovered over the screen. "You embarrassed me in front of my investors. You ruined my wedding. You called the police to throw me out of my own home. So now I am taking everything you have left." With one aggressive tap of his thumb, he executed the transfer. "There it goes," he announced, sliding the phone back into his pocket. $50,000 transferred directly into an offshore account you cannot touch. You are officially broke, Naomi. You do not have a single dollar to your name to pay for your groceries, let alone maintain this massive penthouse. The property taxes alone will drown you by next month." Beatrice let out a nasty, triumphant cackle from the doorway. "That is what you get for crossing us, you stupid girl," she spat. Preston picked up his duffel bag, standing taller now, his chest puffed out with completely unearned pride. "I give it until Tuesday," he said, shaking his head with fake pity. "By Tuesday, you will be calling me, crying, begging me to give you enough money to buy dinner. You will be apologizing on your hands and knees, but I am not going to answer. You are going to lose this apartment, and you are going to end up right back in the garbage dump where you came from." The sheriff cleared his throat, looking extremely annoyed by the dramatic monologue. "Let us move it along, sir," the officer commanded, pushing the front door open wider. Preston gave me one last smug look, believing with every fiber of his being that he had just delivered a fatal financial blow. He turned around and walked out into the hallway, his mother right behind him. The sheriffs followed them out, pulling the heavy mahogany door shut. The lock clicked into place, leaving me in absolute silence. I stood alone in my beautiful penthouse. I looked down at my coffee. It was still warm. I took a sip. Preston thought he had just ruined my life. He thought he had taken my last $50,000. What he did not know was that $50,000 was just loose change to me. And more importantly, he had no idea he had just committed documented financial fraud. The trap was set perfectly, and he had walked right into it. The trap was set perfectly, and he had walked right into it. The $50,000 he just transferred out of our joint account was going to trigger a massive problem for him. Because I knew his financial situation was unstable, I had placed a strict security hold on that specific account weeks ago. Preston's unauthorized transfer of that magnitude was going to automatically flag his personal banking profile for wire fraud by noon. He thought he had cut off my oxygen, but he had just wrapped a noose around his own neck. Before I could even log into my banking app to verify the security freeze, my phone buzzed in my hand. The caller ID showed a number I had only saved a few months ago. It was Keisha. I answered on the first ring. "Are you safe, Naomi?" Keisha asked, her voice low and sharp, cutting straight to the point. "I'm perfectly fine," I replied, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looking down at the busy street far below. Preston and Beatrice just left with a police escort. I formally evicted them from the penthouse. I heard a rich, dark laugh echo through the speaker. "Lord, I wish I could have seen Beatrice's face," Keisha said. "I have been dealing with that woman and her thinly veiled racist comments for 5 years. She always looked at me like I was dirt on her expensive shoes just because I worked my way through law school instead of inheriting a trust fund like her useless sons. I know exactly what you mean, I said, feeling a surge of genuine solidarity. Keisha sighed, her tone instantly shifting from amused to deadly serious. Listen, Naomi, I am calling from a secure line. Donovan is in the shower and he cannot know we are speaking right now. You need to understand that what happened last night at the reception was not just about your parents being placed near the kitchen doors. That was just Beatrice being her usual wicked self. But Preston, he had a much darker, much more desperate motive for rushing this wedding. My grip on the phone tightened. What do you mean, Keisha? A notification chimed in my ear. I just sent an encrypted audio file to your personal email, Keisha explained. Open it right now while I am on the phone with you. Last night before the rehearsal dinner, the family held an emergency meeting in the hotel suite. They conveniently asked me to step out to grab coffees because they consider me an outsider. But I left my tablet under a magazine on the coffee table with the voice memo app recording. I have been building a legal file on these people for a long time, waiting for the right moment to strike. I walked over to the kitchen island, pulled up my email, and downloaded the file. I hit play. The audio was slightly muffled, but the voices were unmistakable. I heard Beatrice pacing the floor, her heels clicking rapidly. Her voice sounded panicked, not arrogant. We are completely out of time, Preston, she snapped. The balloon payment is due in exactly 45 days. If we default on this loan, we lose the development company, the country club memberships, and this family is completely ruined. Then Preston's voice came through, sounding strained and desperate. I know, Mom, I know. That is why the wedding has to happen tomorrow without any delays. Naomi has an 850 credit score and absolutely zero debt. Her financial profile is flawless. Once we are legally married, I have the shady broker ready to push the paperwork through. We just need to forge her signature on the guarantor documents for the commercial bridge loan. She is clueless about finance. She will never even know we used her name until the company starts turning a profit again and we pay it off. My blood ran completely cold. I paused the recording, my mind racing to process the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. A commercial bridge loan? I asked Keisha, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. How much corporate debt are they actually hiding from the public? Keisha did not hesitate. $15 million, Naomi. The family real estate empire has been a hollow shell for 3 years. They have been illegally taking out loans to pay off other loans. The private equity firm that recently bought their primary debt is threatening to foreclose on everything they own. Preston did not want to marry you because he loved you. He wanted to marry you to steal your financial identity, forge federal banking documents, and use you as a human shield against total bankruptcy. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. It was not just about vanity or social climbing. It was a highly calculated criminal conspiracy. Preston was willing to destroy my entire future, saddle me with $15 million of debt, and forge my name just to save his mother's social status. Keisha spoke again, her voice laced with pure venom. I am filing for divorce from Donovan next week, she said. I am taking my rightful share and leaving that sinking ship. But before I do, I want to see them burn to the ground. I want to see Beatrice lose that mansion she loves so much. Are you with me, Naomi? I looked out over the city skyline, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. I am not just with you, Keisha, I replied. I am going to be the one holding the match. I ended the call with Keisha and set the phone down on the cold marble counter. The match was lit, and I was ready to watch their entire fraudulent empire burn. I walked into the master bathroom to take a hot shower and clear my head for the legal battles ahead. But by the time I stepped out and wrapped a towel around my hair, my phone was buzzing so violently it was slowly sliding off the edge of the bathroom vanity. I picked it up expecting another pathetic, threatening text from Preston. Instead, I saw a barrage of notifications from Facebook, Instagram, and several local community boards. I opened the first notification. It was a massive multi-paragraph post written by Beatrice. She had tagged every prominent socialite real estate developer and country club member in our city. The post was a masterclass in gaslighting and manipulation. According to Beatrice, I was a calculating gold digger who had seduced her brilliant son just to drain his corporate accounts. She claimed I had embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from his real estate development firm to fund my secret shopping addictions. She wrote that Preston had discovered my massive theft the night before the wedding and bravely confronted me. To make matters worse, she added a completely fabricated story about me cheating on him with the wedding DJ, which she claimed was the real reason I caused a scene and canceled the reception. Preston shared her post immediately, adding his own dramatic commentary. He played the ultimate victim. He wrote about how he had given me the world, how he had put my name on his luxury penthouse lease out of the goodness of his heart, and how I had repaid his endless generosity by locking him out and stealing his last $50,000. He called me a sociopath. He warned his elite network to stay away from me, claiming I was a dangerous con artist who targeted wealthy men. The local elite blogs picked it up within the hour. The Downtown Chronicle, a highly followed gossip page for the city's wealthiest residents, posted screenshots of Preston and Beatrice claims. The comment section was an absolute toxic wasteland. Hundreds of people who did not even know me were tearing my character apart. They called me a thief, a grifter, and a fraud. Some of Preston's business associates commented that they had always felt something was off about me because I dressed too simply and drove an older sedan. They were feeding off each other, patting themselves on the back for spotting the fake among their elite ranks. At first, I just scrolled through the hateful comments and laughed. It was incredibly pathetic. They were locked out of their apartment, drowning in $15 million of debt and facing federal wire fraud charges, but they were still desperately clinging to their public image. I figured I would just let them type their unhinged rants and wait for the IRS and the court system to handle them. I did not care what a bunch of superficial country club members thought about me. I knew the truth, and I had the bank statements to prove it. But then my phone rang again. It was my mother, Martha. I answered the call and immediately heard her crying. The sound made my blood run cold. "Mom, what is wrong?" I asked, my voice dropping. "Are you and Dad okay?" "Naomi, it is. The house," she sobbed, her voice trembling. People from our neighborhood saw those horrible things Preston's mother posted on Facebook. They believed every word. They think we are part of some massive scam to steal money from that wealthy family. I woke up to a loud crash against the front window. Someone threw a brick into our flower bed. They dumped garbage bags all over our front porch and spray-painted the word thieves across our garage door. Your father is out there right now with a bucket of soapy water trying to scrub it off before the other neighbors see. My vision went completely black for a second. The cool, calculated strategy I had planned with Keisha vanished instantly. Preston and Beatrice had not just attacked my reputation, they had targeted my innocent parents. They had weaponized their fake social standing to incite violence against two retired union workers who had never hurt a single soul in their lives. They humiliated my parents at the wedding, and now they were sending a digital mob to terrorize them at their own home. "Mom, listen to me," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Tell Dad to stop scrubbing. Leave the paint exactly where it is. Go back inside, lock the doors, and do not look at the internet for the rest of the day. I promise you this is going to be over by tomorrow." I hung up the phone. I stood in the middle of the master bedroom staring at the wall. Letting the courts handle this quietly was no longer an option. Silence was no longer an option. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted to use the media to destroy me. So I was going to use their own toxic tactics to crush them publicly, instantly, and without a single shred of mercy. I walked over to the closet and pulled out my sharpest business suit. It was time to go to war. I buttoned my crisp charcoal blazer and checked my reflection in the mirror. Just as I slipped on my heels, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Preston. He demanded we meet at an upscale coffee shop downtown in exactly 1 hour to discuss a peaceful resolution. He chose a public place intentionally thinking it would force me to keep my voice down and comply with whatever demands he was about to make. He wanted to control the environment. I grabbed my leather briefcase, locked the penthouse door, and headed out knowing this was going to be the most satisfying conversation of my entire life. The coffee shop was crowded with business professionals on their lunch breaks. The rich smell of espresso and the loud hum of conversations filled the air. I spotted Preston immediately. He was sitting at a corner table looking incredibly smug. Next to him sat an older man with slicked-back white hair, wearing a suit that was trying too hard to look expensive. I walked over and took the seat across from them, resting my briefcase on my lap. I did not order anything. I just stared at Preston, waiting for him to speak. Preston leaned back, crossing his arms with a confident smirk. "Naomi? This is Mr. Montgomery," he said, gesturing to the older man. "He is the senior legal counsel for my family. We are here to give you one final chance to fix the massive mess you created last night." Mr. Montgomery did not even offer to shake my hand. He immediately reached into his leather portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of papers stapled together. He slid the document across the small wooden table. It was a legally binding, non-disclosure agreement paired with a settlement contract. "My client is willing to be generous despite your erratic and damaging behavior," Mr. Montgomery said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We are prepared to call off the internet mob. Beatrice will delete her Facebook posts, and Preston will issue a statement saying it was all a big misunderstanding. Your parents will not have to worry about bricks flying through their windows anymore." I glanced at the front page of the document, but did not touch it. "And what exactly does this generosity cost me?" I asked, my voice perfectly flat. Mr. Montgomery tapped the paper with his expensive pen. "The terms are simple and non-negotiable," he stated firmly. "First, you will legally transfer the deed of the penthouse to Preston. Second, you will pay a sum of $100,000 to Beatrice for the severe emotional distress and public humiliation you caused her at the wedding. Third, you will record a public video apologizing to the family and confessing that you fabricated the entire story about the venue deposit because you were emotionally unstable." I actually let out a genuine laugh. The sound turned a few heads at the tables next to us. "You want my penthouse? You want $100,000 and you want me to publicly humiliate myself?" I asked, making sure I heard him correctly. "Preston, you do not even have $100 to your name right now, let alone the leverage to demand $100,000 from me." Preston slammed his hand flat against the table, leaning forward aggressively. His face was twisted with the same vicious entitlement his mother always displayed. "You do not have a choice, Naomi," he hissed. "You think you can just embarrass us and face zero consequences. The whole city hates you right now. Your parents are terrified in their own home. You sign the paper or the attacks get much worse." Mr. Montgomery adjusted his silk tie, leaning in to deliver what he thought was the final crushing blow. "Furthermore, Ms. Naomi, if you refuse to sign this agreement today, I will personally make a phone call to the Human Resources Department of your little finance employer. We have drafted a comprehensive letter detailing your alleged embezzlement and erratic behavior. I assure you that a small-time firm like yours will fire a low-level financial clerk instantly rather than deal with a messy public relations nightmare. You will be unemployed, homeless, and publicly ruined by tomorrow morning." They sat back in their chairs, looking like a pair of triumphant predators who had just cornered their prey. They really thought they held all the cards. They thought my job was fragile. They thought I was scared. I looked at Mr. Montgomery and gave him a polite professional smile. "I highly encourage you to make that phone call to my employer, Mr. Montgomery," I replied calmly. "In fact, I can give you the direct extension to the Chief Executive Officer if you would like. But before you do that, you should know that I did not come to this meeting alone." I checked the gold watch on my wrist. Right on cue, the bell above the coffee shop door chimed loudly. I turned my head toward the entrance. Keisha stepped through the glass doors of the coffee shop looking like an absolute force of nature. She wore a tailored burgundy suit that commanded immediate respect and carried a sleek black leather briefcase in her hand. Her heels clicked sharply against the tiled floor as she bypassed the long line of customers and walked directly toward our corner table. Preston frowned, his confusion highly visible. He leaned back in his chair, looking at Keisha as if she were a lost tourist who had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. "What are you doing here, Keisha?" he asked, his tone dripping with his usual careless condescension. "Did my brother send you to pick up my dry cleaning or something? We are in the middle of a very private business meeting, so you need to turn around and leave." Mr. Montgomery let out a heavy sigh, deeply annoyed by the sudden interruption. He did not even bother looking up at her, choosing instead to inspect his manicured fingernails. Keisha ignored Preston completely. She pulled up an empty wooden chair from the adjacent table and sat down right next to me. She placed her briefcase on the table with a solid, authoritative thud right beside the ridiculous settlement contract they had just offered me. "I am exactly where I need to be, Preston Keisha," said, her voice smooth but carrying a razor-sharp edge. "I am here representing my client." She gestured gracefully toward me. "Allow me to formally introduce myself to your legal counsel. I am Keisha, and I am the lead attorney representing Naomi in all civil and criminal matters moving forward." For a brief second, there was total silence at the table. Then Preston burst into loud, obnoxious laughter. He actually slapped his hand against the wooden table, wiping a fake tear of mirth from his eye. He looked over at Mr. Montgomery, who was now smiling a thin, highly patronizing smile. "Oh my God!" Naomi Preston gasped, catching his breath. "You actually hired Donovan's wife. You brought my sister-in-law to a high-stakes legal negotiation. What is she going to do for you right now? Review a standard mortgage application. Keisha, you handle minor contract reviews for my brother when you are not busy playing housewife. You are completely out of your depth here." Mr. Montgomery chuckled, shaking his head slowly. "Miss Keisha, I do appreciate your loyalty to your friend," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "But this is the big leagues. We are dealing with high-level corporate reputation management and serious financial liabilities. You should take your client home before she makes a foolish mistake she will pay for the rest of her life." Keisha did not flinch. She did not raise her voice or show a single ounce of intimidation. Instead, she reached out and picked up the non-disclosure agreement Mr. Montgomery had slid across the table earlier. She pulled a pair of reading glasses from her blazer pocket, slipped them on, and began to methodically scan the first page. "This is a fascinating piece of fiction, Mr. Montgomery," she said, her eyes darting across the paragraphs. "Let us review the terms you have so generously laid out. You are demanding that my client sign over the deed to a multi-million-dollar downtown penthouse. You are demanding a cash payment of $100,000. And in exchange, you are offering to stop publishing defamatory statements online and promising not to contact her employer with fabricated allegations of financial theft." "That is a standard settlement offer," Mr. Montgomery replied, crossing his arms defensively. "It is perfectly legal and customary." Keisha lowered the document and peered over her glasses at the older man. Her eyes were completely cold. "Are you actually a licensed attorney, Mr. Montgomery? Or did you just print a degree off the internet?" she asked. Because any first-year law student could look at this piece of paper and tell you that it is not a settlement agreement. It is documented evidence of federal extortion. Preston stopped smiling immediately. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. Keisha turned her sharp gaze back to Preston. "Under federal law, demanding property or money, under the direct threat of inflicting reputational or professional harm, is extortion," she explained, enunciating every single word with deadly precision. "You just put your blackmail demands in writing. You threaten to ruin her career if she does not give you a house and $100,000 in cash. You literally brought your lawyer here to serve as a witness to your felony." Mr. Montgomery sat up straight, his patronizing demeanor vanishing into thin air. Now, see here, Ms. Keisha, you are taking our words entirely out of context. We simply offered a mutually beneficial resolution to a highly sensitive domestic dispute. Do not insult my intelligence, Keisha snapped, cutting him off completely. You threatened a baseless corporate smear campaign to steal real estate assets. I have the entire conversation recorded on my phone right now, under the one-party consent law of this state. I have your explicit threat to contact her employer, and I have your explicit demand for the property. I could walk out of this coffee shop right now, hand this document and the recording over to the district attorney, and have both of you arrested for conspiracy to commit extortion by dinner time. Preston looked at his lawyer, expecting Mr. Montgomery to fire back with some brilliant legal defense. But Mr. Montgomery was completely silent, staring at Keisha as his face turned pale. He knew she was absolutely right. He had underestimated her because of her race, her gender, and her position in the family. Instead, he had just handed a brilliant corporate attorney a signed confession to a serious crime. Keisha took the non-disclosure agreement, tore it neatly in half, and dropped the pieces onto the table. Keisha took the non-disclosure agreement, tore it neatly in half, and dropped the pieces onto the table. Mr. Montgomery stared at the shredded halves of his extortion plot, his mouth hanging slightly open. Preston looked like he was going to be sick. Instead, he was sitting across from a legal apex predator who had just trapped him in a federal crime. I am not here to report you for a clumsy blackmail attempt, Keisha said. That would be too easy. I am here to talk about your real problem, Preston. Keisha reached back into her sleek leather briefcase. She pulled out a thick, heavy blue folder bound with a tight elastic band. She undid the band and slid the open folder across the table, pushing the torn pieces of the settlement agreement out of the way. The folder was packed tightly with hundreds of pages of bank statements, highlighted ledgers, and internal financial emails. "What is this, Mr. Montgomery?" asked his voice, losing all its previous arrogant bluster. "That is the last 5 years of your client's corporate tax returns," Keisha replied, leaning forward and resting her elbows on the table. Paired perfectly with the shadow ledgers his mother Beatrice tried to hide in a completely separate shell company. "While you were busy drafting pathetic threats, I was doing some deep forensic accounting. Your clients have been systematically inflating their expenses, hiding millions in offshore accounts, and claiming massive fraudulent losses to avoid paying federal taxes. This is not a simple accounting error, Mr. Montgomery. This is intentional, highly coordinated corporate tax evasion." Preston's face turned the color of chalk. His arrogant posture collapsed completely. He slumped forward in his chair, staring at the highlighted numbers on the top page. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, and his breathing grew shallow. He knew exactly what those numbers meant. Mr. Montgomery reached out with a trembling hand and pulled the folder closer. He adjusted his glasses and began flipping through the first few pages. His eyes widened in absolute terror behind the lenses. As an experienced lawyer, he recognized legally damning evidence when he saw it. This was not speculative gossip. These were hard, undeniable bank records showing systematic federal fraud. Within 30 seconds, he aggressively snapped the folder shut and shoved it back toward Preston. He frantically began packing his own briefcase, clicking the locks shut with rapid finality. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with this radioactive material. Preston grabbed his phone from his pocket, his hands shaking so violently he dropped it on the table once before managing to unlock it. He dialed a number and hit the speakerphone button, placing the device directly in the center of the wooden table. The line rang twice before Beatrice answered. "Did she sign the papers?" Beatrice demanded immediately, her sharp voice echoing from the small speaker. "Did you get the deed?" "Mom, listen to me," Preston stammered, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Keisha is here. She is acting as Naomi attorney. Mom, she has our real financial books. She has the shadow ledgers and the offshore transfer records. She knows everything about the tax evasion." There was a brief, heavy pause on the line. But instead of panic, Beatrice let out a loud, harsh bark of laughter. The sheer delusion of the woman was staggering. "Do not be ridiculous, Preston." Beatrice sneered, her voice dripping with absolute contempt. "She is bluffing. Keisha is nothing but a desperate amateur playing dress-up in a cheap suit. She does not have the clearance or the brains to understand our high-level corporate accounting. She is just a bitter outsider trying to scare us because she knows her own marriage to your brother is falling apart. Do not let that pathetic little girl intimidate you." I leaned forward, resting my hands flat on the table. "It is incredibly dangerous to underestimate people you consider beneath you, Beatrice," I said, aiming my voice directly at the phone microphone. Keisha did not even blink at the horrific insults. She simply reached out and tapped a manicured fingernail against the heavy blue folder. "You have exactly until 5 o'clock this evening," Beatrice Keisha announced, her tone perfectly flat and devoid of any emotion. "By 5 o'clock, I expect a full public retraction of every single defamatory statement you posted online today. I expect a formal apology to my client and her parents posted clearly on all your social media platforms. If I do not see those posts live by 5 o'clock sharp, this entire blue folder gets hand-delivered to the IRS." Beatrice scoffed loudly. "You would not dare." "Try me," Keisha replied, and pressed the red button to end the call and smiled at them both without any mercy. Keisha stood up, gracefully smoothing the front of her burgundy suit. She picked up her heavy leather briefcase, leaving the torn pieces of the extortion agreement scattered across the table like confetti. We did not wait for Preston to say another word. We turned our backs on him and walked out of the coffee shop into the bright afternoon sun. My heart was pounding, but my mind was completely clear. We headed straight back to my penthouse to set up what Keisha called the digital war room. We spent the next few hours sitting at the large marble kitchen island. Keisha had her laptop open, organizing the forensic accounting files and preparing the secure emails. I sat next to her, watching the clock on the wall tick away the minutes. Preston and his mother had been given a clear ultimatum. They had a window to save themselves from absolute destruction by simply swallowing their pride and telling the truth. But people like Beatrice and Preston are fundamentally incapable of admitting defeat. They honestly believed they were untouchable. At exactly 4:55, I refreshed my browser and checked Beatrice's social media pages. There was no apology. There was no retraction. In fact, she had posted another update doubling down on her lies. She claimed her lawyers were currently handling a deranged former associate, meaning me, and thanked her elite friends for their unwavering support during this trying time. I showed the screen to Keisha. Keisha just shook her head and took a sip of her water. "The arrogance is truly a terminal disease," she said softly. The clock struck exactly 5 o'clock. Keisha did not hesitate for a single second. She moved her cursor and clicked send on the first email. That email contained the entire blue folder of shadow ledgers, offshore bank transfers, and proof of massive corporate tax evasion. It went directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Federal Tax Authority. The legal machinery was now officially in motion, and there was nothing Preston could do to stop it. But we were not done. Sending documents to government agencies takes months to unfold behind closed doors. We needed an immediate public reckoning. We needed the internet mob they had weaponized against my innocent parents to hear the absolute, undeniable truth. At 5:01, Keisha opened a secure messaging application and contacted a senior investigative journalist she knew at one of the largest financial news networks in the city. The journalist had been tracking rumors of Preston Family Company facing insolvency for months, but lacked the hard evidence to publish an article. Keisha provided the smoking gun. She attached the 2 audio files and hit send. The first file was the audio from the wedding reception. It clearly captured Beatrice's shrill, entitled voice mocking my father's cheap suit and stating that working-class people were not fit to sit near her wealthy friends. The second file was the secret recording from the hotel room. It featured Preston's own voice, explicitly admitting to the $15 million corporate debt, panicking about the balloon payment, and clearly outlining his illegal plan to forge my signature on federal loan documents. Within 30 minutes, the news network published a breaking investigative piece on their main website. The headline was explosive, exposing the fake wealth and criminal conspiracy of one of the city's most prominent real estate families. But the text of the article was not what broke the internet. It was the embedded audio clips. The narrative shifted so violently, it felt like a physical shockwave. The exact same local elite blogs that had been calling me a gold digger an hour ago were now scrambling to delete their posts. Social media caught fire. People were outraged by Beatrice's disgusting comments about my parents. The working-class residents of the city united in their absolute fury, flooding her social media pages with massive backlash. The fake high society friends who had supported her earlier suddenly went completely silent, wanting to distance themselves from a public relations disaster. But the most devastating reaction came from the business world. The audio of Preston admitting he was secretly $15 million in debt and planning to commit loan fraud went viral on professional networking sites. Every single investor he had been trying to impress at the wedding heard him confess to being a complete financial fraud. The internet mob he tried to unleash on me had turned around and was now tearing his entire family legacy to shreds. I sat back in my chair watching the comments roll in, knowing this was only the beginning of their nightmare. Because the real financial execution was scheduled for tomorrow morning, I smiled at Keisha and closed the laptop. It was time to get some rest. I woke up the next morning feeling more rested than I had in 3 years. The early sunlight streamed through the massive windows of my penthouse, reflecting off the polished hardwood floors. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and turned on the large flat-screen television mounted on the wall. I bypassed the morning talk shows and switched directly to the primary financial news network. I wanted a front-row seat to the destruction. At exactly 9:30, the opening bell rang on Wall Street. The anchors were already buzzing with the scandal that had completely taken over the internet overnight. They played a short snippet of Preston's voice from the leaked audio explicitly admitting to the $15 million debt and outlining his plan to forge loan documents. The moment the market officially opened, the stock for his family real estate development firm went into a total freefall. Totals? I stood there sipping my coffee as the red ticker crawled across the bottom of the screen. Within the first 15 minutes, the stock dropped 10%. By the end of the first hour, it had plummeted 25%. Traders were dumping their shares as fast as humanly possible, entirely terrified of being associated with a company actively admitting to federal fraud. By 11:30 in the morning, the stock had tanked a staggering 40%. Millions of dollars in market valuation simply evaporated into thin air. The company board of directors was reportedly holding an emergency panic session, but no amount of corporate spin could fix an audio recording of the chief operations officer admitting to a felony. My phone buzzed on the marble counter. It was Keisha. I put her on speakerphone as I watched the news anchors frantically analyze the historic plunge. "Are you watching this?" Keisha asked, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. "I am looking at the screen right now," I replied. "It is a complete bloodbath." "You have absolutely no idea how bad it is on the inside," Keisha said, letting out a sharp laugh. "Donovan has been pacing a hole in our living room rug since 6 o'clock this morning. Preston's phone has been ringing off the hook nonstop. Every single lender, every private investor, and every contractor they work with is calling to demand their money immediately. Their primary banks have initiated aggressive margin calls. The financial walls are rapidly caving in. They are officially being pushed to the brink of absolute bankruptcy, and they know it." "What about Beatrice?" I asked, walking over to the window and looking down at the bustling city streets. Keisha sighed, but there was absolutely no pity in her tone. "Beatrice is completely hysterical. She spent the entire night trying to get her wealthy country club friends to defend her online, but they all blocked her number. Her social circle abandoned her the second the tax evasion news broke. Now, she is crying in her mansion because the corporate attorneys just called to inform her that her house is listed as collateral for the business loans. If the company goes under, the bank takes her precious luxury estate. She is currently packing her most expensive jewelry into a safe just in case the feds raid the property. The sheer poetry of the situation was incredible. Less than 24 hours ago, Beatrice had tried to publicly humiliate my parents for being working-class citizens. Now she was facing the very real possibility of losing her own home and joining the ranks of the people she despised so much. So what is their next move, I asked. Surely they are not just sitting around waiting for the federal agents to knock on their doors and seize their assets. No, they are scrambling. Keisha, replied, her tone turning deadly serious. They have one last desperate lifeline. Last month, their primary commercial bank got extremely nervous about their delayed payments and quietly sold their toxic $15 million debt portfolio to a secondary buyer. The family has been trying to figure out who bought the debt for weeks. They finally got an answer this morning. Who bought it? I asked, pretending I did not already know the answer. A ruthless private equity firm in Manhattan called Titanium Capital, Keisha explained. Preston and Beatrice have been begging the managing partners of Titanium Capital for an emergency meeting all morning. They are absolutely desperate. They want to ask the chief executive officer for a 90-day extension on their loan payments. If Titanium Capital agrees to restructure the debt, they might be able to survive this massive public relations nightmare. But if Titanium Capital calls in the loan today, they lose the company, the mansion, and everything else by sunset. They secured a meeting, I asked, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. Yes, Keisha confirmed. The firm finally agreed to see them at 2:00 this afternoon at their downtown headquarters. Donovan, Preston, and Beatrice are all putting on their best designer suits right now. They are preparing a massive presentation to beg the mysterious executive of Titanium Capital for mercy. They think they can charm their way out of this disaster, just like they always do. I could not help the wide, genuine smile that spread across my face. I looked around my luxurious penthouse purchased with the profits from my own massive financial empire. Tell them to dress their absolute best, Keisha, I said softly. Because the chief executive officer of Titanium Capital is a very strict judge of character. Keisha ended the call and slipped her phone back into her pocket. She walked out of the guest bedroom and down the grand sweeping staircase of Beatrice's sprawling luxury estate. The entire house felt like a sinking ship rapidly taking on water. The usually pristine marble foyer was cluttered with discarded leather briefcases and thick stacks of printed financial documents. Keisha followed the sound of frantic shouting coming from the formal dining room. When she stepped through the heavy double mahogany doors, she found Preston and Donovan standing over the massive custom dining table. The expensive wooden surface was completely covered in red-lined ledgers, past due notices, and empty coffee cups. Preston was furiously typing on his laptop, his expensive silk tie hanging loosely around his neck. His face was pale and covered in a thin layer of nervous sweat. "We need to focus on the projected third-quarter revenue," he barked, pointing aggressively at the glowing screen. "If we just show Titanium Capital that the downtown commercial project is nearing completion, they might give us the 90-day extension we desperately need." Donovan ran his trembling hands over his face, looking entirely out of his depth. "Are you insane, Preston?" he yelled back, his voice cracking with pure panic. "The downtown project has been stalled for 6 entire months. We have not paid the structural contractors since October, and they are threatening to place liens on the property by Friday. The chief executive officer of a Wall Street private equity firm is not going to fall for fake spreadsheets and empty projections. They are going to want to see actual liquid assets, and we do not have a single dollar left to our name." Preston slammed his fist against the table, causing the ceramic coffee cups to rattle violently. "Then we lie, Donovan," he hissed, his eyes wide with desperation. "We do what we always do. We sell the brand. We sell the family legacy." We just need to buy enough time to secure a new bridge loan from another shadow lender. If we walk into that boardroom looking defeated, they will tear us apart instantly. We have to look like we hold all the power even if we have absolutely nothing. Just then, Beatrice swept into the dining room. Her face was a rigid mask of pure panic heavily disguised as righteous anger. She was holding a beige designer suit on a heavy wooden hanger. She marched straight past her arguing sons and shoved the hanger directly into Keisha's hands. Keisha, the housekeeper, quit this morning because Preston bounced her last paycheck, Beatrice snapped, not even bothering to make eye contact. I need you to take this upstairs and iron it immediately. It is my vintage Chanel, and it cannot have a single wrinkle on it. I am not walking into the Titanium Capital headquarters looking like a common peasant. We are meeting with the highest level of Manhattan finance today, and appearance is absolutely everything. They need to know they are dealing with true elite society members, not desperate beggars. Keisha looked down at the expensive fabric draped over her arm. She did not argue or raise her voice. She did not point out the massive irony that her own husband was currently facing a $15 million default and potential federal prison time while his mother worried about a wrinkled jacket. She simply nodded with a perfectly blank expression. Of course, Beatrice, Keisha said, her voice smooth and devoid of any sarcasm. I will make sure it looks absolutely flawless for your big meeting. Keisha turned around and walked toward the laundry room, feeling the heavy weight of the situation. She pressed the steam button on the iron, watching the hot vapor rise into the air. She meticulously smoothed out every single crease on the beige blazer. Beatrice thought she was putting Keisha in her place by treating her like the hired help. She had absolutely no idea that the woman ironing her suit was the exact same woman who had just handed her entire financial history to the federal government. Back in the dining room, Preston was still furiously rehearsing his pitch. We walk in with total confidence, he instructed Donovan, pacing back and forth across the expensive Persian rug. We do not apologize for the missed payments. We frame it as a strategic delay due to market volatility. We remind them that our family name carries significant weight in the commercial real estate sector. Keisha listened to their delusional planning from the hallway as she carried the freshly pressed suit back to Beatrice. They were completely disconnected from reality. They truly believed their fake social status and a good suit could save them from massive documented financial fraud. Beatrice snatched the hanger from Keisha without a single word of thanks and hurried off to finish her makeup. Keisha stood quietly in the foyer, watching the three of them scramble to gather their briefcases and car keys. They were rushing straight to the slaughterhouse, entirely blind to the trap waiting for them. The drive from their suburban estate into the heart of Manhattan was agonizingly silent. Preston gripped the steering wheel of his luxury sedan so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. Beatrice sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, her lips pressed into a thin, anxious line. She was wearing the beige vintage Chanel suit Keisha had just perfectly pressed, clinging to it as if the fabric itself could somehow shield her from the impending financial ruin. Donovan sat in the back, nervously reviewing a stack of printed spreadsheets that contained nothing but fabricated numbers and desperate projections. They pulled up to the towering glass skyscraper of Titanium Capital. The building was an imposing monolith radiating absolute corporate power. It was the kind of architecture designed to make anyone standing at its base feel incredibly small. They stepped out of the car and walked through the massive revolving doors into a sleek minimalist lobby, lined with dark marble and polished chrome. Despite the fact that their entire empire was crumbling by the second, Beatrice immediately slipped back into her usual arrogant persona the moment she saw the reception desk. She marched right up to the front desk, flanked by her sons, and slammed her handbag onto the pristine counter. The young receptionist looked up politely, waiting for them to speak. "We are here for a 2:00 emergency meeting with the Chief Executive Officer," Beatrice announced, her voice echoing sharply across the quiet lobby. "I am Beatrice, and these are my sons Preston and Donovan. We are the executive board of our real estate development firm. Please inform your boss that we have arrived and require immediate VIP access to the executive suites. We do not have time to sit around in a waiting area." The receptionist did not flinch at her demanding tone. She simply typed their names into her computer system, her expression perfectly neutral. She handed them 3 temporary visitor badges printed on cheap adhesive paper. "You are expected on the 60th floor," the receptionist said, pointing toward a bank of private elevators. "Security will escort you up." Beatrice glared at the sticky paper badge with utter disgust, peeling the backing off and slapping it carelessly onto her expensive lapel. They followed a massive security guard in a sharp black suit into the private elevator. As the doors slid shut, the reality of their situation seemed to finally crash down on Preston. He tugged at his collar, trying to loosen his tie. He wiped his sweating forehead with the back of his hand. Donovan was practically hyperventilating, clutching his briefcase so hard his arms were shaking. The elevator chimed and the doors opened to the 60th floor. The entire level was a testament to cutthroat Wall Street's success. It was eerily quiet, with floor-to-ceiling glass walls offering a dizzying panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. An executive assistant greeted them with a cold, professional smile and led them down a long corridor. She opened a set of heavy, frosted glass doors, revealing a massive boardroom. The room was dominated by a long table carved from a single slab of black walnut surrounded by sleek leather chairs. "Take a seat and set up your presentation," the assistant instructed. "The chief executive officer will be with you shortly." She closed the doors, leaving them alone in the intimidating space. Panic immediately took over. Preston rushed to the head of the table, pulling his laptop from his bag with trembling hands. He fumbled with the connection cables, dropping one on the floor before finally plugging it into the massive presentation screen mounted on the far wall. Donovan paced back and forth across the room, muttering to himself, trying to memorize the script they desperately threw together that morning. Beatrice stood by the window, looking out over the city, trying to maintain her composure, but her hands were visibly shaking. They were absolutely terrified. For weeks they had heard terrifying rumors in elite financial circles about the mysterious founder of Titanium Capital. The chief executive officer was known as a ruthless phantom who never gave interviews, never attended socialite galas, and operated with surgical precision. This executive had built a reputation for buying up toxic debt and liquidating legacy companies without a single ounce of mercy. They had completely destroyed older, richer families than theirs. Preston clicked through his PowerPoint slides, his heart hammering against his ribs. The slides were full of lies, inflated revenue projections, and empty promises of future development. He knew deep down that if this mysterious titan of industry saw through his fabricated numbers, their entire family would be walking out of this building straight into federal custody. They stood in silence, staring at the heavy boardroom doors, waiting for the executioner to arrive. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then an entire hour. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, broken only by the quiet hum of the air conditioning system. They had been left to stew in their own mounting panic. Beatrice finally broke the silence, letting out an exasperated sigh that echoed loudly off the glass walls. She began pacing the length of the long walnut table, her vintage Chanel suit looking increasingly stiff and uncomfortable. "This is completely unacceptable," she snapped, glaring at the empty chair at the head of the table. "We are a legacy real estate family. We do not sit around waiting like common applicants applying for a bank teller position." She marched over to a small silver intercom panel on the wall and pressed the button. "I demand some service in here," she barked into the speaker. "Bring us 3 sparkling waters and find out what is taking your executive so long." 5 minutes later, a junior assistant entered the room carrying a cheap plastic tray. She did not bring sparkling water in crystal glasses. She set down 3 basic paper cups filled with lukewarm tap water. The assistant did not apologize for the delay or offer any updates. She simply turned around and walked out, shutting the doors behind her. Beatrice stared at the paper cups, her face turning a deep shade of crimson. It was a calculated insult designed to show them exactly where they stood in the food chain. Donovan let out a harsh, bitter laugh, staring at the pathetic cups of water. "We are not high-net-worth clients, Mom," he shot back, his voice shaking. "We are beggars. We are literally here to beg for our financial lives. Look at these spreadsheets on the screen. If the people running this firm actually audit these fake projections, we are going to federal prison by the end of the week. Preston ignored their bickering. He was sitting rigidly in his leather chair, staring down at his phone. His leg was bouncing nervously under the table. He needed a lifeline. He needed to know he at least had a personal safety net if Titanium Capital completely rejected their plea. He opened his secure banking application, intending to look at the $50,000 he had stolen from my joint checking account that very morning. He typed in his passcode and waited for the screen to load. The screen flashed a bright, aggressive red. A large warning banner appeared across the top of his digital dashboard. The words "Critical Security Alert" and "Active Wire Fraud Investigation" burned into his retinas. Preston frantically tapped the screen, refreshing the page over and over again, hoping it was just a terrible glitch. His available balance was not $50,000. It was negative $400. The funds had been completely reversed. Keisha had not just frozen the account, she had legally clawed back the stolen money and flagged his entire financial profile for domestic wire fraud. Preston felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him dizzy and physically nauseous. He was not just facing corporate bankruptcy anymore. He was entirely personally broke. The arrogant speech he had delivered in my kitchen about leaving me penniless echoed in his mind, mocking him. He did not even have enough money left to hire a cheap defense lawyer, let alone buy a taxi ride back to his mother house. "What is it?" Beatrice asked, noticing his terrifying, pale complexion. "Are the news outlets posting about us again? Have we lost another contractor?" Preston could not even speak. He slowly shook his head, shoving the phone face down onto the cold walnut table. "I have nothing," he whispered, his voice entirely hollow. "She took it all back. Naomi took the money back. I am completely broke." Beatrice rolled her eyes, completely failing to grasp the severity of his personal crisis. "Forget about that pathetic little girl," Beatrice scolded him, walking back to the window and glaring at the city below. "We have a $15 million corporate crisis to solve right now. Once we secure this extension, we will bury Naomi in endless litigation until she is completely ruined. Focus on the presentation, Preston. Pull yourself together." Another agonizing hour dragged by. The psychological torture was highly calculated and incredibly effective. The room felt like a glass cage suspended high above the city. The walls were literally closing in on them. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees, leaving Donovan shivering in his expensive suit. They were entirely isolated, trapped with their own lies and their impending doom. They had completely run out of options. There was no one left to manipulate, and absolutely no one left to blame. The digital clock on the presentation screen flipped to exactly 4:00 in the afternoon. They had been waiting for 2 solid hours. The silence had become completely suffocating. Preston buried his face in his hands, entirely defeated. Beatrice stood rigidly by the table, her arrogant facade finally cracking under the immense crushing pressure. Then, they heard the sound. It was the sharp, distinct click of a heavy metal latch turning. The three of them froze instantly, whipping their heads toward the far end of the room. The heavy oak doors that connected to the private executive inner sanctum slowly began to swing open. The grueling wait was finally over. The executioner had arrived. I stepped through the heavy oak doors and into the freezing air of the executive boardroom. I was not wearing the simple pastel cardigans and sensible flat shoes I used to wear around Preston. I had always dressed down to make him feel financially superior, to protect his fragile ego. That version of me was completely gone. Today I was wearing a bespoke $5,000 charcoal power suit tailored to absolute perfection. My hair was pulled back into a sleek professional style, and my designer heels struck the polished floor with the sharp rhythmic sound of absolute authority. I did not walk in alone. I was flanked by a team of 3 ruthless corporate lawyers, all dressed in identical dark suits carrying thick leather portfolios. The moment I crossed the threshold, the entire dynamic of the room shifted violently. Preston was still staring at the open doors, his mouth slightly parted in sheer confusion. Donovan dropped his expensive pen onto the table, watching me walk past him with wide, unblinking eyes. I did not look at either of them. I kept my gaze fixed straight ahead, walking directly to the massive leather executive chair at the very head of the black walnut table, the chair that had been empty for 2 agonizing hours, the seat of ultimate power in this building. I pulled it out and sat down, resting my hands flat on the polished wood. My legal team immediately took the seats flanking me on either side, opening their heavy portfolios in perfect unison. For a long, excruciating moment, nobody spoke. The silence was so thick you could physically feel it pressing against your chest. Preston looked at me, then looked at the expensive lawyer sitting beside me, his brain completely failing to process the visual information. The cognitive dissonance was too much for him to handle. It was Beatrice who finally broke the silence. She let out a sharp, condescending bark of laughter. The sheer magnitude of her delusion was truly incredible. She actually thought her reality was the only one that existed. "Oh my goodness!" Beatrice gasped, placing a hand over her chest as if she had just witnessed a hilarious comedy routine. "You actually got a job here." "Job? After we threw you out of the apartment this morning, you ran straight to a temp agency and got a job as a secretary for Titanium Capital." This is absolutely priceless. Preston seemed to grab onto his bizarre rationalization like a drowning man grabbing a life preserver. He let out a shaky breath, a nervous, arrogant smirk returning to his pale face. "Naomi, what are you doing?" he asked, his tone dripping with his usual condescension. "Did the reception desk send you in here to bring us more tap water or something? You are completely out of your depth. We are in the middle of a highly confidential corporate meeting with the executive board of this firm. You need to leave this room right now before you get yourself fired on your very first day." Donovan, however, was not laughing. He was looking closely at my tailored suit at my lawyer's and at the complete lack of fear in my eyes. He swallowed hard, slowly realizing that a temp agency secretary does not walk into a boardroom flanked by high-powered litigators. But Beatrice was entirely blind to the obvious clues. Beatrice stood up straighter, pointing a manicured finger toward the heavy oak doors. "Get out of here right now, you pathetic little girl!" She snapped, her voice echoing loudly off the glass walls. "I do not know how you talked your way onto the executive floor, but this is a private multi-million-dollar negotiation. We are waiting for the chief executive officer to arrive. If you do not turn around and walk out that door this exact second, I am going to press the security intercom and have you physically dragged out of the building. And trust me, I will personally make sure the managing partners of this firm know exactly what kind of unhinged stalking psycho they just hired." I did not move a single muscle. I just sat at the head of the table watching them flail in their own ignorance. The absolute panic masking as arrogance was a beautiful thing to witness. I looked at the lead litigator sitting to my right. He did not even glance up from his paperwork. He simply reached forward and pushed a silver button on the table console, locking the heavy oak doors from the inside. The loud mechanical click echoed through the entire room, sealing them inside with me. Beatrice slowly lowered her pointing finger. Her arrogant smile began to falter as the reality of the locked door finally registered in her mind. Beatrice slowly lowered her pointing finger. Her arrogant smile began to falter as the reality of the locked door finally registered in her mind. She looked at the heavy steel bolt, then back at the lead litigator sitting to my right. He calmly closed his leather portfolio and folded his hands on top of the dark walnut table. "Mrs. Beatrice," he said, his voice projecting effortlessly across the massive room, "I highly suggest you lower your voice and show some immediate respect to the founder, majority shareholder, and chief executive officer of Titanium Capital. You are sitting in her building. You are breathing her air. And as of yesterday morning, she officially owns every single piece of your family debt." The words hung in the freezing air of the boardroom. They did not register immediately. Beatrice blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She looked at the lawyer, then at me, then back at the lawyer. "That is impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Naomi is a low-level finance clerk. She drives a 5-year-old sedan. She buys her clothes on sale. You are lying to try and intimidate us." I finally spoke. My voice was calm, steady, and carried the weight of a woman who controlled a massive asset portfolio. "I drive a reliable car and wear comfortable clothes because I do not need to flaunt my wealth to feel valuable." "Beatrice," I said, leaning back in my leather executive chair, "only people drowning in debt feel the desperate need to wear vintage Chanel to a business meeting to prove they belong." Preston staggered backward until the back of his knees hit his leather chair. He collapsed into it heavily, staring at me with a look of absolute, unadulterated horror. The color drained from his face entirely, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. The puzzle pieces were violently slamming together in his mind. The pristine credit score he had tried to exploit. The penthouse owned by an LLC that I casually evicted him from. The $50,000 reversed with a single phone call. It all made perfect, terrifying sense now. "You," Preston choked out, clutching the armrests of his chair. "You are titanium capital. You are the private equity ghost everyone is terrified of." I smiled. "I started this firm 7 years ago." I explained, my tone strictly professional. "I built a multi-million-dollar net worth from the ground up while you were busy spending your parents' money on designer suits and fake country club memberships. When we met, I intentionally hid my wealth. I wanted to see if you loved me for who I was, or if you were just looking for another financial stepping stone. You failed that test spectacularly. You thought I was just a naive middle-class office worker you could easily manipulate." I continued, watching Preston's eyes dart around the room. "While you were bragging about your fake real estate deals at fancy dinners, I was secretly auditing your company public records. I bought your toxic debt portfolio 3 weeks ago, knowing you would eventually default. I gave you every opportunity to be an honest man. Instead, you chose to plot federal loan fraud against me." Donovan put his head between his knees, taking deep, ragged breaths. He was having a full-blown panic attack right there in the boardroom. He realized instantly that they had not just angered a former fiancé. They had personally insulted and tried to extort the apex predator of their financial ecosystem. Beatrice was trembling violently now. Her knees gave out and she sank into the chair next to Preston. The arrogant matriarch was completely gone, replaced by a terrified woman staring at her own executioner. "But Naomi," she stammered, her voice cracking with desperation. "We are family. We were almost family. You cannot possibly do this to us." "Do not ever use that word with me again, Beatrice," I commanded. "You made it abundantly clear exactly what you think of my family. You shoved my hard-working parents into a dark corner by the kitchen doors because you thought they were beneath you. You tried to ruin my career this morning with a pathetic extortion attempt. Family protects each other. You only protect your fake image." I gestured to the junior lawyer on my left. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a remote control, and pointed it at the massive presentation screen. The screen flickered to life. It displayed a highly detailed forensic breakdown of their corporate structure, including the $15 million in toxic debt I now legally possessed. "Now that we have established exactly who I am and exactly who is in charge," I said, tapping my pen against the table, "let us talk about your complete financial ruin." Preston's laptop was plugged into the main screen. I reached across the table and casually unplugged his connection cable. The massive digital display went completely black for a second. My junior lawyer tapped the screen of his tablet, and the display flared back to life, instantly synced to our internal secure network. "What are you doing?" Preston asked, his voice trembling violently. "We have a presentation prepared. We have projected revenue models and architectural mock-ups for the third quarter." You have a pathetic collection of fabricated spreadsheets designed to commit bank fraud? I corrected him, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or sympathy. I am not here to listen to your desperate sales pitch. I am not a naive bank manager you can easily manipulate. I am here to deliver a verdict. The massive screen behind me illuminated the dark room. It did not show optimistic graphs or fake construction timelines. It showed a stark, highly detailed forensic breakdown of their entire corporate and personal portfolio. Every single asset, every hidden offshore bank account, and every single crushing liability was laid bare in high definition. The numbers were glowing in a bright, aggressive red. Donovan let out a strangled, horrible gasp. He recognized the data immediately. They were the real numbers. The exact figures they had spent years trying to hide from the government, from their private investors, and from each other. Let us review the harsh reality of your situation, I said, picking up a silver laser pointer and directing a small green dot at the top of the screen. You currently owe my firm exactly $15,420,000. Your commercial real estate developments have generated zero actual profit in 36 months. You have illegally leveraged every single property you own, including the family estate, just to make the minimum interest payments. You are not a wealthy real estate dynasty. You are running a highly functioning Ponzi scheme. Beatrice stared at the screen, her eyes wide with absolute terror. You cannot possibly know all this, she whispered, shaking her head in denial. Our accounts are private. We use secure servers. When you purchase a toxic debt portfolio, you gain full legal access to the complete financial history of the debtor, I explained calmly. 3 weeks before our wedding, my acquisitions department flagged a major commercial bank desperately trying to offload a massive failing debt package. The bank knew your firm was going under, and they wanted to cut their losses quickly. When I saw your family name on the file, I made a decision. I authorized Titanium Capital to purchase your debt for pennies on the dollar because everyone else on Wall Street knew it was pure garbage. Preston looked like he had been physically struck by a freight train. You knew he choked out, gripping the edge of the table. You knew we were broke before we even finalized the wedding catering. I knew absolutely everything, Preston, I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the polished wood. I knew your business was failing. I knew you were drowning. I actually bought the debt to protect you. I thought you were just too incredibly proud to admit your failure to me. I was prepared to restructure the loan internally, keep it quiet, and help you rebuild your company as a true partner. I gave you every single opportunity to come clean and ask for help. I paused, letting the heavy weight of my next words sink deeply into their minds. But then Keisha recorded your little family meeting. I continued, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. I heard you explicitly state that you were going to use my perfect credit score and forge my signature on federal loan documents. You were going to saddle me with $15 million of your toxic waste without my knowledge, just so your mother could keep pretending she was wealthy. Donovan practically threw himself across the table, his hands clasped together in a pathetic gesture of begging. Naomi, please, he cried, tears actually forming in his eyes. We were desperate. We were terrified of losing everything. If you just give us the 90-day extension, we can turn the downtown commercial project around. We can pay you back. I swear to you, we can fix this mess. The downtown project has been completely stalled for 6 months. Donovan, I shot back, shutting down his desperate lie instantly. Your structural contractors have not been paid since October, and your city building permits expired 2 weeks ago. You have absolutely no capital to restart construction. There is no magical turnaround plan. There is only a massive crater of debt, and you are standing at the absolute bottom of it. I stood up from my executive chair, towering over them. The final nail in the coffin was ready to be hammered into place. You came into my building today, expecting to charm a faceless Wall Street executive into giving you a lifeline, I announced, my voice echoing with absolute finality. But you are looking at the woman you tried to destroy. You threatened my career. You terrified my parents. You tried to steal my entire future. Beatrice began to sob quietly, burying her face in her trembling hands. The vintage Chanel suit suddenly looked incredibly pathetic on her shrinking, defeated frame. There will be no 90-day extension, I stated coldly, delivering the fatal blow. There will be no restructuring and there will be no mercy. Your loan is officially in default as of this morning. As the primary lien holder, I am executing my legal right to seize all collateral immediately. I am seizing the company. I am seizing your commercial properties, and I am taking the family mansion. The words hung in the air like a physical execution order. I am taking the family mansion. That specific sentence finally broke whatever fragile thread of sanity Beatrice was holding on to. The vintage Chanel suit suddenly looked like a tragic costume on a woman stripped of her entire identity. She let out a guttural, undignified wail that echoed horribly off the glass walls. Her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the hard, polished floor. She did not just fall, she actively threw herself forward, crawling on her hands and knees until she was right at the edge of my leather executive chair. Naomi, please, I am begging you, she sobbed, tears ruining her expensive makeup. You cannot take my home. I have lived in that house for 30 years. It is my absolute sanctuary. We are family, Naomi. Deep down, you know we are family. I always thought of you as a daughter. I was just stressed about the wedding costs. Please just give us one more chance. I looked down at her, entirely unmoved by the theatrical display of grief. It was pathetic to watch a woman who built her entire life on projecting superiority suddenly groveling on the floor of my office. You never thought of me as a daughter, Beatrice, I said, my voice ice cold. You thought of me as a disposable asset. You thought I was a blank check you could forge to save your failing lifestyle. You did not care about my parents when you forced them to sit by the kitchen doors. You did not care about my reputation when you posted those vicious lies on the internet this morning. You only care about yourself right now because the bank is coming to take your marble foyer. I reached down and firmly pulled my skirt away from her grasping hands. Get off the floor, Beatrice, I commanded. You are embarrassing yourself. Beatrice stared up at me, her tear-streaked face twisting from desperate sorrow into pure, unadulterated rage. When she realized that my sympathy was non-existent, her survival instinct kicked in. She scrambled to her feet, her chest heaving as she spun around to face her oldest son. Preston was still sitting in his chair, staring blankly at the forensic financial breakdown glowing on the massive screen. Beatrice marched over to him, grabbed him by the lapels of his suit, and hauled him to his feet. Before Preston could register what was happening, Beatrice raised her right hand and slapped him directly across the face. The sharp crack of skin against skin echoed like a gunshot in the silent boardroom. "You incompetent fool!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "This is entirely your fault, Preston. You had one simple job. You just had to keep her happy until the ink was dry on the federal loan documents. You ruined this family because you were too weak to control your own bride." Preston stumbled backward, clutching his rapidly reddening cheek. The shock on his face instantly morphed into vicious defensive anger. He lunged forward, getting right into his mother face. "My fault," he screamed, his voice breaking. "Are you actually blaming me for this disaster? I played my part for 3 years. I kept the financial rot a secret. We were at the finish line, Mom. The only reason this whole thing blew up is because you could not swallow your massive ego for one single evening. You just had to move her parents to the back of the room. If you kept your arrogant mouth shut, Naomi never would have walked to the DJ booth. You destroyed this company because you are an elitist snob who cannot stand the sight of working-class people." Donovan leaped up from his leather chair, joining the chaotic screaming match. "Both of you are completely insane," Donovan yelled. "We are going to federal prison because you two thought you could outsmart a Wall Street executive. My life is over because I listened to my idiot brother and delusional mother. They completely abandoned any pretense of loyalty or love. The elite real estate dynasty devolved into a pack of wild animals turning on each other the absolute second they were backed into a corner. They screamed and cursed, blaming everyone but themselves for the financial fraud they had collectively committed. I watched them tear each other apart with absolute satisfaction, knowing that their fake high society friends would soon see this exact level of pathetic desperation. I sat quietly in my leather chair, watching the empire burn from the inside out. My highly paid legal team sat perfectly still beside me, watching the wealthy family cannibalize itself right in front of our eyes. They were destroying each other much faster than I ever could have hoped for. They were destroying each other much faster than I ever could have hoped for. As Preston and Donovan continued to hurl vicious insults at their mother, the locked oak doors at the back of the boardroom suddenly clicked open. The heavy wood swung wide, revealing a familiar figure stepping confidently into the freezing air of the executive suite. It was Keisha. She was still wearing the tailored burgundy suit, but she no longer carried the demeanor of a quiet, overlooked sister-in-law. She carried a thick stack of legal documents in her arms and a look of absolute triumph on her face. Beatrice momentarily stopped crying and looked up from the floor, her tear-streaked face twisted into a mask of pure confusion. "Keisha," she choked out, wiping her ruined makeup with the back of her trembling hand. "What are you doing here? Did you bring the revised contracts? Tell Naomi we can fix this. You are a lawyer, Keisha, do something to stop her." Beatrice actually believed Keisha had rushed all the way downtown to save the very family that had treated her like absolute garbage for 5 long years. The delusion was still clinging to her like a desperate parasite refusing to let go. Keisha did not even look at Beatrice. She walked right past the groveling matriarch, ignoring her completely, and approached the head of the walnut table. She stood right beside my executive chair and placed the heavy stack of legal documents directly in front of me. She smoothed her hand over the top page and finally turned to look at the family. "I am not here to save you, Beatrice," Keisha said, her voice echoing with sharp, clear authority. "I am here in my official capacity as the lead legal counsel for Titanium Capital. I drafted the final foreclosure documents for this specific corporate acquisition." Donovan stopped breathing entirely. He stared at his wife, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and utter disbelief. "Keisha." "What are you saying?" he stammered, taking a shaky step toward her. "You work for her. You helped her destroy our family company. You are my wife." Keisha turned her piercing gaze onto her husband. "I did not destroy your company, Donovan," she replied coldly. "Your greed, your fraud, and your complete lack of morals destroyed this company. You sat back and watched your mother hurl racist insults at me for years. You treated me like a glorified secretary. I just made sure I was standing on the winning side when your pathetic house of cards finally collapsed. And speaking of standing on the winning side, I have one more piece of paperwork to deliver today." Keisha reached into her sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a thin manila envelope. She tossed it onto the table right in front of Donovan. The envelope slid across the polished wood and stopped perfectly at his fingertips. "Those are your divorce papers," Keisha announced. "I filed them early this morning before the market opened, and your stock completely tanked. Over the last 6 months, I systematically and legally separated my personal finances from your fraudulent corporate accounts. I am taking exactly half of our remaining liquid assets, which I safely secured in an independent trust. You get to keep the sinking ship, the federal investigations, and the millions of dollars in toxic debt." Donovan let out a pathetic whimpering sound. He reached for the manila envelope with trembling fingers, realizing that his brilliant, capable wife had outsmarted him at every single turn. He was entirely broke, facing potential federal prison time, and now completely alone. Preston sank further into his chair, covering his face with his hands, unable to watch his brother break down. The reality of their total annihilation was finally settling over the room. There were no more tricks to play. There was no more manipulation. They were entirely out of moves. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a heavy gold fountain pen. I unscrewed the cap, the metallic sound ringing sharply in the quiet room. I looked down at the thick stack of foreclosure documents Keisha had placed in front of me. I did not hesitate for a single second. I pressed the gold nib to the paper and signed my name on the dotted line. With that single signature, The entire real estate empire built on lies, arrogance, and stolen money was officially terminated. I slid the signed documents back to Keisha, who neatly placed them into her briefcase. "It is done," I announced, looking at the 3 broken people standing in my boardroom. I pressed the silver button on my desk console. Within seconds, the heavy oak doors swung open again. 4 massive security guards in sharp black suits marched into the room. "Escort these individuals out of my building," I commanded. The guards moved in immediately, grabbing Preston and Donovan by their arms. Beatrice began screaming, kicking her expensive designer heels against the floor as 2 guards hauled her to her feet. They dragged the crying, shouting family out of the boardroom, their voices echoing down the glass hallway, until the elevator doors finally clamped shut. They dragged the crying, shouting family out of the boardroom, their voices echoing down the glass hallway, until the elevator doors finally clamped shut. The heavy silence rushed back into the room, instantly replacing the chaotic noise. I looked over at Keisha, who was calmly packing her legal documents back into her sleek leather briefcase. We did not cheer or pop champagne. There was absolutely no need for theatrical celebrations. We had surgically removed a toxic cancer from our lives, and the overriding emotion was simply a profound, peaceful clarity. The trap had sprung flawlessly, and the execution was absolute. 2 months passed by in an aggressive blur of legal proceedings and corporate liquidations. The collapse of the family empire was not a slow, gradual decline. It was a spectacular public implosion broadcasted across every financial news network and local gossip blog in the city. The public narrative had permanently shifted, and there was absolutely nowhere for them to hide. Beatrice faced the most severe psychological fall from grace. She was formally evicted from her sprawling luxury mansion just 3 weeks after our meeting in the boardroom. The bank seized the property, changing the locks and placing a massive foreclosure sign on her pristine front lawn. Within 24 hours, her beloved elite country club terminated her membership, citing a strict moral turpitude clause in their bylaws regarding active criminal investigations. Her wealthy socialite friends did not just abandon her, they actively avoided her, treating her like a highly contagious disease. They blocked her phone number and instructed their security guards to turn her away at their gated communities. With her assets entirely frozen and her credit completely destroyed, Beatrice had 0 options left. She was forced to rent the only place that would accept her without a rigorous financial background check. It was a tiny, cramped 1-bedroom apartment on the absolute outskirts of the city. The paint was peeling off the walls, the cheap linoleum floors were stained, and the plumbing constantly rattled. She was living the exact life she had always mocked. But the most beautiful piece of poetic justice was the physical location of the rundown building. The apartment sat directly adjacent to the main industrial rail yard. It was the exact same rail yard where my father Thomas had worked as a dedicated union man for 30 years. Every single night, Beatrice had to try and sleep while massive heavy freight trains rumbled past her thin single-pane windows, shaking the floorboards of her tiny bedroom. She had publicly mocked my father for being a working-class man in a cheap suit, and now the defining sound of his honest hard work was the permanent soundtrack to her miserable, isolated reality. She occasionally ventured out to the local discount grocery store, wearing her faded vintage Chanel suit, desperately clinging to her past, while paying for canned soup with exact change. Preston was faring significantly worse. The Federal Tax Authority and the Criminal Investigation Division did not waste any time. Federal agents raided the corporate offices, seizing all remaining hard drives, ledgers, and communication records. 2 weeks ago, Preston was formally indicted on multiple federal felony charges, including wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit extortion. Because Keisha had legally frozen and drained his illicit personal funds, Preston was entirely broke. He could not afford the high-powered, aggressive defense attorneys his family had always relied on to bully their way out of trouble. He was assigned an overworked public defender who told him bluntly during their very first meeting that he was looking at a minimum of 5 to 7 years in a federal penitentiary. To pay for his basic daily living expenses while awaiting his criminal trial, Preston had to find immediate employment. Naturally, no reputable company would ever hire a man actively indicted for massive corporate fraud. The former luxury real estate developer who once bragged about his elite portfolio was forced to lease a cheap compact car and sign up as a full-time rideshare driver. He spent his long, miserable days fighting through brutal downtown traffic. The ultimate humiliation came when he had to pick up wealthy corporate executives from the exact same luxury high-rises he used to pretend he owned. He had to sit in the driver's seat wearing a cheap polo shirt, forcing a fake smile, and offering his passengers complimentary bottled water. He desperately hoped for a 5-star rating and a few dollars in tips just to afford his weekly groceries. On one particularly brutal afternoon, he actually picked up one of the elite investors who had attended our ruined wedding reception. The investor recognized Preston immediately, but did not say a single word, choosing instead to stare out the window in pitying silence, while Preston drove him to a luxury steakhouse. Donovan was living in a cheap roadside motel, facing his own severe legal battles. Keisha finalized her divorce with surgical precision, legally securing her independent assets and completely severing all ties. She left Donovan to face the federal prosecutors entirely on his own. The elite family had completely ceased to exist. They were reduced to 3 bitter, paranoid, and isolated individuals desperately trying to survive the crushing consequences of their own boundless greed. 6 months after that final meeting in the boardroom, my life looks entirely different. I am standing on the expansive cedar deck of my actual primary residence, which is a stunning custom-built estate sitting right on the edge of a pristine private lake. The late afternoon sun is casting a warm golden glow over the water, and the rich smell of smoked brisket fills the crisp evening air. I never brought Preston to this house. I had always kept it completely hidden from him, knowing deep down that he would only see it as another asset to exploit. Now it is filled with the sound of genuine laughter and the people who actually matter. I look over toward the edge of the stone patio and smile. My parents, Thomas and Martha, are sitting in the absolute best seats in the house. They are relaxing in plush, oversized lounge chairs, positioned perfectly to watch the sunset over the water. My father is not wearing a cheap, stiff suit today. He is wearing a comfortable linen shirt and holding a crystal glass filled with a $200 vintage red wine. My mother is laughing out loud at a joke, leaning back and looking more relaxed than I have seen her in years. There are no wobbly tables here. There are no swinging kitchen doors to hide them behind. They are the guests of honor, and they will be treated like absolute royalty for the rest of their lives. Sitting right across from them is Keisha. She is wearing a simple, elegant sundress, looking completely refreshed and radiating a quiet, unshakable confidence. After her divorce was finalized, Keisha did not just walk away with half of Donovan's remaining assets. She walked into my office with a brilliant business plan for a boutique corporate law firm. Titanium Capital fully funded her startup costs as a strategic investment. Today, Keisha is the managing partner of her own highly successful practice, representing female entrepreneurs and helping women navigate complex financial divorces. She completely shed the heavy toxic weight of Beatrice's constant judgment and stepped into her own incredible power. We clink our wine glasses together, celebrating a victory that goes far beyond money or revenge. As I stand here watching the people I love enjoying the beautiful life we built together, I cannot help but reflect on how easily I almost lost myself. For 3 years, I made myself smaller to make a deeply insecure man feel tall. I hid my financial success, my intelligence, and my ambition because I desperately wanted to fit into a family that was completely broken on the inside. I thought that by playing the quiet, supportive girlfriend, I could earn their respect and their love. But toxic people do not respect humility. They view kindness as a weakness to be exploited, and they view boundaries as a personal attack. I learned the hard way that you can never shrink yourself enough to make a toxic person comfortable. If you have to hide your light to keep someone else from feeling insecure, you are standing in the wrong room. Preston and his family wanted a victim they could manipulate to save their dying empire. Instead, they woke up a giant who owned the very ground they walked on. Sometimes when you finally stop making excuses for the people hurting you and stand firmly in your own truth, you realize that the trash truly does take itself out. They orchestrated their own spectacular downfall through their boundless greed and breathtaking arrogance. I simply handed them the shovel they used to dig their own graves. If you are watching this right now, and you are currently dealing with a partner or a family who constantly belittles your accomplishments, dismisses your feelings, or demands that you sacrifice your own dignity for their comfort, I want you to hear this loud and clear. Do not ever apologize for your success. Do not ever let anyone make you feel like you are too much or not enough. Set your boundaries aggressively and enforce them without a single ounce of guilt. You are entirely responsible for protecting your own peace, and sometimes that means walking away from the table completely, or in my case, buying the table and kicking them out of the building. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Have you ever had to walk away from a deeply toxic family dynamic or a partner who was secretly dragging you down? How did you finally break free and reclaim your own power? I would absolutely love to hear your experiences and your victories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience, growth, and ultimate payback. Remember that your worth is never negotiable, and your best chapter is always waiting on the other side of your bravest decision. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never let anyone dim your brilliance. The most profound lesson embedded within Naomi's journey is the absolute danger of shrinking yourself to accommodate the fragile egos of toxic people. For 3 long years, Naomi intentionally hid her immense financial success, her sharp intellect, and her true capabilities. She played the role of a quiet, unassuming partner wearing simple clothes and driving an older car entirely because she deeply wanted to be loved for who she was rather than what she possessed. However, in her earnest attempt to find genuine connection, she accidentally made herself a prime target for manipulation. Toxic individuals do not view humility as a virtue. They view it as a glaring vulnerability to be ruthlessly exploited. Preston and his mother Beatrice built their entire identities on a fragile illusion of superiority. They demanded that everyone around them conform to their twisted hierarchy, punishing anyone who did not fit their superficial mold. When Naomi finally witnessed them disrespecting her hardworking parents, the illusion shattered. The turning point of the entire narrative is not simply the dramatic financial retaliation, but the profound internal shift when Naomi decides to stop playing small. Stepping into your own power requires the ultimate courage to let the wrong people misunderstand you. When Naomi revealed her true identity as the chief executive officer of Titanium Capital, she was no longer fighting for a seat at their toxic table because she owned the entire building. This story serves as a powerful reminder that true self-worth is never negotiable. You cannot heal people who are fiercely committed to their own toxicity, but you can absolutely enforce ironclad boundaries that permanently protect your peace. Stop shrinking to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold your brilliance and start building your own table today.